David, it's a pleasure to have you on Just Get Real. I've been working with you for the last sort of 4 or 5 months. You've been coaching me, helping me with my sort of rebranding of my podcast. So it's lovely to have you on the show.
I'm so glad to be on Just Get a Real Job. Jamie, I appreciate what this podcast stands for. I think it's such a worthwhile and needed show for your industry, and I think you're doing an amazing job running it. So it's a pleasure to be invited on your show.
No, it's so nice to have you here. And you're about to sort of relaunch your own show. When this episode goes out, I think you will have relaunched it. So just to sort of start the episode, like you start yours, like what is your origin story, David? Tell us about that.
I feel like a Marvel superhero, the Genesis story. Kind of traditional working class upbringing, with some unconventional events. Very privileged in a weird way to have grown up in such a working class environment. I grew up in a council estate in Prestwick, to my mother and my father. They were together throughout my childhood, which was a luxury,
Mm.
but things were a bit more turbulent. Grew up on the breadline, received things like Provident loans and payday loans just to keep us afloat. There was a ambient sense of financial hardship that manifested itself in both anxiety and depression in the household, both of
Mm.
which you could place the word financial in front of because that was the root cause. I was very lucky to have access to the internet at that moment
Mm.
in time in my life because I could look online and see people that were doing things a bit more aspirational than me, Jamie. And uh, I used a lot of that tooling alongside some early origin stories that kind of passed by my life, including Scotland's richest man, Sir Tom Hunter, sharing his story at my high school, that allowed me to not believe that I was going to be successful, but I could believe that
Mhm.
things could get better. So, yeah, started a kind of finance career, which was aided through a social mobility charity, which I cared deeply about, and was able to gain financial security, education, purpose, meaning. And alongside that, I got to,
Mm.
I guess, hand down a bit of rope or my only bit of rope to people that were just below me or just behind me in the journey of doing the same. And that manifested itself in doing a lot of social mobility advocacy, and starting my podcast, which
Mhm.
is a directory of role models that I wish I had maybe 5, 6 years before that.
I think what's mad about a lot of that stuff is you're still very young. Like you've done all this stuff at quite a young age, and like quite like I don't know, you'd broken free of a lot of that. It's easy when you come from a working class background to not have that aspiration or to not see it as like a viable option and stuff. And you've sort of broke free from that almost and like made a lot of things happen. And I have someone I want to sort of talk to you about in this interview as well is about being a sort of entrepreneur and being creative at the same time and like going and being a bit of a self starter, making things happen. Like that's not something that naturally comes to me. That's something I'm having to learn. And I feel like you're such a good example of someone in the podcast space that sort of just goes and does things like at quite a rapid rate. And it's very impressive.
I appreciate that. That's such a nice observation. I've never really thought about that before. I think when you come from backgrounds of insecurity, of little resource, you have no option but to be resourceful,
Mm,
to take more risks, to take bigger swings, because ultimately you have nothing to lose.
mm,
And I think perhaps that's where that comes from for me. Knowing how bad things have been, tapping into that is my
mm.
motivation source. I think that has been a privilege. My hardships have totally been my privilege. And I don't want to come on here and do this whole rags to riches type story or do woe is me. But I think a lot of the traits that I have come from my upbringing. I love this quote by former First Lady Abigail Adams when she says, "The habits of a vigorous mind are developed in contending with great difficulty. When a
Mm,
young mind is raised by scenes that engage the heart, traits that would otherwise lay dormant wake into life and form the character of the superhero."
mhm,
I hold that so dear to me. I really do. And I think just the nature of how I grew up, the lack of opportunity, the lack of awareness to opportunity, is what I tap into now, and I'm very grateful for that upbringing. My mum and dad did the best they could based on their
mm.
circumstances, and my job now is to do the same. And I would be doing my parents a disservice, I would be doing my own origin story a disservice if I didn't take big risks, because that's what got me here, and hopefully I can do the same to help others get there and help my kids have a better upbringing than me. I'm not here to say that people should be more working class
Hmm.
and embrace more hardship. It was hard, like going week to week, not knowing whether you were taking a packed lunch to school or having holes in your clothes or some of the mental health and addiction, travesties that kind of fall foul around your council estate. Those were hard, and I don't want my kids to have those either. So I don't want to like try and promote this hardened mindset, this
Hmm.
embrace tough times mindset too much, because I hope that people that are listening to this have a better upbringing than me, uh,
Hmm.
and I'm just lucky that I can use mine now as a gift.
Yeah.
In terms of my aptitude and attitude towards
Mhm.
new tasks.
I think what's interesting as well, and something I've really tried hard to do in the last few years, particularly because when I was a student, I remember thinking like often just anyone that was from a better off background than me just instantly going, oh, like reverse snobbery almost. And I think it's
Mm.
important now. I try to like remind myself like you can learn from other people instead of just writing people off. Because at the end of the day, like not most people don't, they can't, you can't really help where you come from,
S-
and you can probably be a bit of an arsehole if you're from a working class background or if you're really rich. So it's nuanced, isn't it?
It's such a good observation as well. I totally agree. I went through a phase. I remember one of my close friends, one of my best friends growing up, Taylor. Love that guy. Shout out Taylor Patterson. I'm not sure if we can do shout outs in this
Right,
podcast.
go for it.
But honestly, the humblest, loveliest guy. And growing up alongside him, I was going through this very liminal, transformative kind of 18 to 21-year-old period.
Mhm.
And loads of things were changing in my life environmentally, financially. And I was working really hard, uh, applying myself in numerous different ways, just trying to make ends meet, trying to become resourceful, be entrepreneurial. And he, at the same time, was not progressing in university,
Mhm.
wasn't utilizing his spare time well, but his upbringing was very safe, secure. His parents worked so hard, first generation kind of social mobility, worked so hard that he didn't have to have a part time job or
Mhm.
have to be entrepreneurial to have pocket money or spare change. And I remember resenting that, Jamie, and it created a barrier between me and him, because I was trying to force my
Mhm.
worldview onto him and I couldn't quite understand his. And as I have been able to learn from hundreds of hours and stories and really learn about what social mobility means, I realized that that was such a toxic way to think.
Mhm.
And we wouldn't do that across any other
Mhm.
characteristic or diversity characteristic. Like, I know a lot of working class people that slag those who go ski holidays, for example.
I was actually
Uh,
at a comedy show last night. There was a whole bit about that. Somebody was doing.
right? And like they create stereotypes and create bits and jokes and
Mhm.
sketches about that, kind of lambasting it and bastardizing it. But in fact, I would love to go ski holiday, mate. I would love that. But we wouldn't do that across any other diversity characteristic. We wouldn't pick
Mm.
a sexuality or a race and then like mock their stereotypes, for example. But why do we find that acceptable to do with
Mhm.
class? Um, so I've had to re-engineer
Mhm.
that thought process, but I also realized re-engineering that thought process is a luxury as well, because I can only do that now that I have become more socially mobile.
Mhm.
I guess if I was still living hand to mouth, or I was still living in my dad's council estate, relying on payday loans, then I don't think I would have the luxury to then not have that belief that
Mhm.
people from upper middle class are evil or different or malicious. And I think it's only because I've got this survivorship bias or
Mhm.
survivorship story or social mobility
Mhm.
bias that I can now profess that the working class isn't the lesser class in the eyes of the middle class.
Yeah, it's also hard when you're in fight or flight, like a lot of people are in that. Like, Simon Squibb talks about this a lot. Like, I mean, I really quite like some of the work he's doing, but he talks about if people are in fight, when he stops people on the street and says, "What's your dream?" A lot of the time they aren't from working class backgrounds, they're in fight and flight, they're just surviving week to week. So it's hard, as you say, to have that, like, you know, perspective and think, maybe not everyone who's done well for themselves is evil, and maybe because they're millionaires, they actually are invested in the economy, and their taxes are helping us. I mean, obviously, there's people that are exploiting the system, but that's not everyone. So I think it is it's a nuanced discussion.
I really enjoy that thought because I agree that most people, and I totally resonate with this, like are living meal to meal, day by day, paycheck to paycheck.
Hmm.
They can't think strategically about their life. They don't have the
Hmm.
luxury to think, if money, fame, and status was no option, how would I live my life? And I'm going to pursue that. They can't renounce the 9 to 5. They can't renounce the shift work they might be doing, the night shifts. And I think being able to have such a strategic mindset towards your own life is a bit of a luxury belief,
Hmm.
or doesn't seem feasible for that that group of people who are living in fight or flight because all they care about is where's the next check coming from, where's the next benefit coming from, where's the next meal coming from, how am I going to keep my kids warm during winter.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably why climate change doesn't proliferate as a message to working class people, especially those who are aided by government initiatives, because they don't really care if their food is organic or comes in plastic
Mm-hmm.
packaging or not, because they're just caring whether there is food on the table.
Yeah.
They don't care if they're using solar panels or not, because they just
Mm.
care whether their house is warm or not.
Yeah.
And I think this long-term strategy towards life is a luxury belief to those who can afford to think in that manner.
Yeah, completely. Because also, like with climate change, it's not an immediate thing that's affecting their life either. If like their roof was blown down because of it, it would maybe go, oh, but because as you say, it is a long term thing, so it's hard to have that perspective. I want to hone in on origin stories because you're wearing the T-shirt of the rebrand and stuff. But like, what does origin story mean to you? Because you think about a lot of things in that frame, and also like that's the new name of the show. It's changed from the development by David to origin story. So what does the term origin story mean to you?
Learning from an origin story is the discovery of self through the detour of the other.
Mm-hmm.
We all have an origin story, and they don't start with a plan. It starts with a moment in time, your genesis. Every athlete, every great, every founder, everyone has one. We both do too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, especially in this fast fashion, consumerism, AI driven world, especially with social media giving us dopamine at every corner of our lives, we're not asking how or why. And it's part of this broader social mobility message of like renouncing how I've almost bastardized certain classes, like learning that everyone has an origin story, you, me, and otherwise. And each of those would sit as a own individual autobiography in a library. And if you were to pick up each individual book, you would learn something. And I now realize that one of the best questions you can ask someone is, what is your origin story? There's so much intel that comes from that. And like, I really believe life is a movie. And your eyes are the cameras, your ears are the microphone. And you get to pick up on other people's origin stories in such way. But life is really like a movie. And there's an award-winning actor that no one else can play. And that's you. And if you embrace your origin story, you can tap into intel, information, highlights, lowlights, and everything in between that no one else can, because only you have lived your life. And I realize there's just as much merit in a celebrity origin story than there is the old woman that you bumped into in the coffee shop this morning. We are all a lattice of unique data points through experience that both shared and internalized can lead to self-discovery and betterment of the world. And I think the greatest travesty is that people live and die without hearing the sound of their own voice and their own story. And life just becomes way more fuller when an origin story is embraced.
No, that's such a lovely answer. And I think we talked about this a lot. Like the joy of podcasting is we get to tell stories, but we get to hear people's stories as well. Because both our podcasts, we're interviewing people. And we'd also spoke about sometimes you put the value of a podcast on the biggest guest you'd had on. We'll talk about Jimmy Carr and some of the big guests you'd had today, but like sometimes it's actually not the biggest guests that always have the most interesting origin stories. The people that you interview and you're like, whoa, like that's insane. And I think it's such a joy to get to hear people's origin story.
Yeah. I really think it's your relationship with the research as well that allows to create that magnet effect. I have related to more everyday stories on my podcast than I have some of the celebrities, because there's common ground. We're living in the same kind of liminal space, and we can provide each other with solace or get solace from each other because we're going through similar experiences. And I think, for better or for worse, shared suffering brings people together. There's accounts during the Blitz whereby families were happy and cheering and laughing in the underground when bombs were going off because they were going through this horrible thing together.
Yeah.
And I think I've gained a lot of that from some of the similar stories to mine that I've had on the show. So yeah, I think it's such a privilege and a gift to have a platform to share origin stories, because I really believe an origin story is a gift but not yours to keep. It's a baton and a forever relay race that you pass on to the next.
Just to expand on that as well, like how can we use origin stories, for example, in the workplace? Do you think employers can tap into that for people individually?
I think the opposite of it. I think showing the inverse will show the effects of why not embracing an origin story is detrimental to the workplace. Of course, workplaces have key performance indicators, they have business objectives, they have goals,
Mhm.
and I understand that human resources act as a engine to make those things happen. So I understand that businesses have strategic goals first. All that to be said, if an organization doesn't allow people to bring their whole selves to work, and I know that's quite a wanky phrase, but like if they don't allow to their employees to bring their whole self to work, they're actually curtailing and losing out a lot of innovation.
Agreed.
Um, Coming from a certain geographic location, being a migrant or an immigrant, having a certain sexuality, being a mother, whatever, choose your path. All of those have data points, information, and innovation that can be used, especially when organizations are trying to serve everyday problems. They need to understand the everyday person.
Mhm.
But what a lot of, especially corporate careers and financial services careers, they create a caricature of what a typical employee should look like or feel like or seem like in those
Mhm.
organizations. And what it creates is something called a deficit discourse, whereby an erosion happens of thought patterns and
Mm.
slangs and
Mm.
idiosyncrasies of a certain group. And they all kind of assimilate into like a very similar version of each other. And AI is doing the same. It's one of the things I fear for AI is that someone with culturally rich intelligence, for example, slang or creativity or something that's very pertinent to a certain region, they
Mhm.
put this into AI, and AI essentially spits out a very PC,
Bland almost.
bland, vanilla, correct, quote unquote, correct answer. And that creates a feedback loop to the inputter that what they put in was wrong and what AI spat out was right. And it erodes that part of their identity. And
Mhm.
then they just start selling a fake idea of themselves in the workplace and outside
Mhm.
of it.
That's interesting with AI. I think I sometimes need to be careful with that because I think AI has been a great tool to help streamline the podcast that in terms like optimize strategies and things to like with my workload. But I never liked I don't know I don't like it to give me questions for interviews, for example, because it completely that where you're like no that, something I think of could be so much more.
Exactly. And
Mm,
what becomes your unique selling point if it's not you?
mhm.
Like, if AI is writing this show, then why would anyone listen to it? Because
Yeah.
what people come and stick around for is you, Jamie. It's why I'm so
Mhm.
delighted to be on the show, is because I really
Mhm.
like you. And
Mhm.
I love when you follow your nose in terms of your curiosity when asking guests questions or even picking guests.
Mm.
And if I'm not buying that, well, then what am I buying?
Because you could
And
get it
you
anywhere
can get it
nowadays.
anywhere.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things we need to be aware of in the next sort of 5 to 10 years as society is going to change so much with AI coming into our work and stuff. Because I think it will be a lot about personal brand and like personal, what's the word for it? Like,
Origin stories.
yes, exactly. I think it's true though. I think that's going to be what makes you different, what makes you stand out.
Yeah, because no one else can do it, mate. It's your competitive advantage and it's
Mm,
your compass because no one else has it.
mm,
And as AI does erode culture, a lot of culture, I believe, um, origin stories is the only thing that AI can't create and technology won't explain.
mhm,
We have reduced all innovation and storytelling to computation, which only allows us to see one way of doing things. But in fact, there's many ways to doing things, and you can learn through origin
mhm,
stories, people. It's the greatest sense of intel, in my opinion.
mhm,
For better or for worse, I've had death row inmates and high school shooters on my podcast. I've had people with malicious upbringings
mhm.
who have maybe course corrected, and understanding what not to do from an origin story is equally as good as understanding what to do as well. Um, I think your observation is right, man.
Mm. I wanted to sort of ask you about this as well because there's always a lot of this podcast where people from the creative industries on. I think you're quite unique because you, as you say, worked in finance as a day job, but you're also creative because you do a podcast. You're a content creator. You do stand up. So like, what could the creative industries learn from business? Because I actually think there's a lot of business people in the creative industries, but I think a lot of day to day creative people including myself, I've had to learn this more recently. We don't embrace entrepreneurialism. We don't embrace business in the same way. And I think what maybe gives you an advantage in this space is you have come from a finance business area where you have both. Maybe I could maybe describe you as like a creative entrepreneur or something like.
I'm blushing, man. That's super nice. Um, I guess like I have fledgling opinions on this. Sometimes I think you should leave the creatives just to be creative and allow
Hmm.
them just to like create art and do the work, ship the work. Whether it takes them 12 weeks or 1 week,
Hmm.
just be a creative by nature. Like a lot of Rick Rubin's work kind of follows that kind of message.
Hmm.
The idea, I think my friend Rory Sutherland said, when he,
What a statement in itself, my friend Rory Sutherland.
I guess so. He loves when he sees his employees staring at the window because like that they're like creatively marinating. So there's a part of me that's like a purist about creativity, and like creativity shouldn't and couldn't be defined, and we shouldn't be putting the entrepreneurial tendencies and especially finance. We shouldn't be layering that over the top of such a expressive outlet. Like, but you see that in business, right? Finance always questions the spend of marketing, but marketing doesn't ever question finance's work, to be honest. So there's a part of me that's a purist around that, and art is art, creativity is creativity. But all that being said, if I were to try and fuse the two, I don't know too much about the creative industry. Like, you work in like TV and screen and all that stuff, but the only kind of close call I can think of is comedy. And I think there's a subsector of comedians who think focusing on business and entrepreneurship in their art is like a bit cringy and not cool. And they try and be a bit more nonchalant. And it's part of their persona. Like, I see a lot of comedians post their like shows and they don't put a lot of effort into promoting it. And it's like just a selfie of them walking down the street and they're like, come see me next Wednesday, without any specific details. And then there's the kind of entrepreneurial minded comedians who are like putting a lot of work into promotion and maybe doing paid ads and doing really kind of savvy and strategic campaigns. And especially in comedy, there's something called the circuit. And it's basically like a kind of, especially in Scotland, like a kind of by nature circle of gigs that a work in progress, open spot, open mic comic does. And what maybe a professional comedian would say is like, you use the circuit to get off of it. But I think a lot of comedians might just stay on it. And they don't realize that there is a life beyond that. And yes, that takes work. It takes maybe taking a few big swings, big risks, like maybe getting an agent, for example, or trying to do your own show at the Fringe or something like that. So I think maybe risk appetite could be something that they could learn. Back-end processes in terms of like boring things like diary management, finance management, all that stuff. But also realizing that their progression in comedy is actually a relational game. And it's like how they create really great relationships with bigger comedians who can then vouch for them. Some of my favorite comedians in Glasgow, I see giving a hand up to many kind of aspiring comedians, and they've built careers off of that, which is great. But also like things like agents and production houses, and maybe trying to get in front of the camera more, all that kind of stuff. Producing content as well, building a personal brand in the space, being known for something. It's something I've helped you with over the last few months, is like being an authority figure in the creative arts career space. I guess I'm rambling here, Jamie, about saying like, I guess my toil is leave the creatives. There's a part of me that's like, leave the creatives to be creative, but there's the other part of me is like, oh, but you can get more money by doing a spreadsheet once a month. I don't really have the answer to that, man. What works for me is like systematizing my goals. I'm systematizing my creativity. And the only reason I do that is because I enjoy doing it so much that I need to find a way that it either at least allows me to stay in the game of doing it financially, or grows so I can do it more full time. And I can only do that by applying a business mindset. I don't think just being creative or just being lucky will ever get me to doing this full time. So I think
otherwise you're just playing the lottery then.
Yeah. I can be consistent, but I can be consistently shit. So like looking for the 1%, looking for continuous improvement, streamlining processes, I split test ads and stuff like that as well. Like when I get a thumbnail, like my current thumbnail that's going out over the next couple of weeks, like we have like 5 different copies and we're doing like A/B tests to see what one sticks well, and then we're going to get information from that, data from that, and then we'll be like, right, okay, this style really worked, we're going to continue doing it. Things like that, man. And I've learned that from other big podcast houses. Like I'm very lucky to be like spending time with like, the Diary of the CEO and some of their team, and they pass all this kind of stuff down to me through their teams. So I'm still learning, man. I'm still in the trenches, but yeah, there are some of the things that I've been doing on the podcast.
It is so nuanced. I had somebody on the podcast this week and we spoke about this as well, because a lot of creative people, they just want to be left alone to be creative, and they are quite. I get a lot of resistance in the industry working for people who don't get the business side, because I'm having to teach myself that. But I think it depends what you want as well. If you want to like just be creative and you're comfortable maybe being skint for your whole life, like I think that's totally fine. I respect that. But
Or hire someone in to do
yeah,
that stuff.
that's what I was about to say. Or you share, skill share or think outside the box. Like for example, like I've spoke to you many times about some of my like limitations and what I know my strengths and weaknesses are, and then we discuss like, well, could you maybe outsource that, or go and get someone to help you and stuff. Even like hiring you as a coach in the first place, like was partly because I'm like I don't have the marketing skills. So I think you can. It's just using your agency, isn't it? I think as well.
And how
you know.
good is the rebrand, by the way? It looks amazing, right?
No, thank you very much for all the help on that.
But no, I agree. And I was thinking this the other day, and it was a good conversation I had with a comedian through Edinburgh called Dan Borman, who's travelled, he quit his job in New Zealand and travelled to Edinburgh, packed his bags and said, I'm going to try and make comedy work. And we were talking about, he's got a bigger following me, he does bigger gigs than me, but we're just talking about that moment where you tell a really great joke on stage and there's a bit of an applause break, or like you try and say your next joke but people are like still laughing. Like that's such a great feeling. One of the best feelings I've ever had in the world, and we're bonding over this mutual respect for this feeling. And I said something to him like, I just pity that not everyone gets the chance to feel that. And he pulled me up about it. He said, some people don't want to feel that. Some people just want to consume comedy. They don't want, it's our worst nightmare to ever be on stage and even have that moment. That barista over there is not thinking, oh, I pity anyone that's not brewing this exact roast with this exact art. Like we're not envious of him doing that, but he's putting on a performance. And if you really think about it, everyone has day-to-day performances that are innate to them and it's their thing. So for example, in this context, podcasting is your thing, the interview process, the research is your thing, the finance, the business, that isn't. But that could be someone else's thing where they love. And with the Origin Story, I've got a team of amazing people at the moment. It's one of the things I've been conscious of, working on a freelance basis. And one of the guys, like all he cares about is like operations. So he's like managing systems and doing all that stuff for me because I don't really care for it really. So I've outsourced that. And he might like get a thrill from doing that because he's like, oh, look at this new setup I've done for the team. Whereas I couldn't think of anything worse. Whereas like being here on camera, I remember like he was in the other day when I was doing an episode, he was like, David, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you can sit in front of a camera and talk and trust yourself to say the right things. But right now this is like I'm in flow, I'm enjoying this. So perhaps it is like allowing the creatives to be creative and then outsourcing an agency model around you to support. We're financially viable. Like my guys, I'm not paying them wages. They're helping me out because they believe in the mission. And I guess that's a part of the power of origin stories is persuasion. A story is a deal. One of my good friends, I need to stop saying that, but one of my friends, Will Starr, just wrote a book called A Story is a Deal, whereby, for example, one of the things that he brought to life was in the 80s, Adidas had like 3% market share. They were about to go bust. And then Run DMC wrote a song, I forget what it's called, but something to do with Adidas. And then they like garnered the whole hip hop community because it tied into the identity. It tied into the origin stories of DMC and the people that associate with the hip hop community. And like even building a team, like having an origin story, knowing what you stand for, even religion is a story because it gives people goalposts and parameters and a way to act. But like having your own religion, your own philosophy, having your own thing that you stand for is so important, and you attract a tribe around you who want to support that. And for example, on my podcast, rebranding from Development by David, which is typically the David Show because my name's so self-referential in it, to Origin Story, and the philosophy that your origin story is your unique competitive advantage, allowed these lads to relate to that and want to be part of it, and they helped me out for next to nothing because they believe in this mission. So I think an origin story or storytelling allows you to build both self-worth and self-assurance, but also attract those around you who believe in the same.
I really like that. No, it's all really interesting, and just try to think. Yeah, I suppose it's whatever works for you as well. But I think if you do think in that way, it can definitely help. I want to talk a bit about the podcast of the old podcast really, because it's obviously about to. I want to talk to you about what's coming, but I also want to quickly touch on the last 4 years because we basically started podcasting around the same time. I think I was like a month before you or something, which is interesting. Like sort of 4 years on, the journey's mad for you and stuff as well. And
maybe our periods will end up syncing.
Perhaps I'll have to keep in touch about that.
Send me pictures.
Yeah. I what's interesting, I'm trying to stay composed to it. What's interesting is I saw yesterday was actually a year to the day since the Jimmy Carr interview.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
don't want to attach, I know it must be annoying for you because sometimes I'm sure people just talk about that and you're like, I've done all these other things as well. But that was quite a big moment.
Paul,
where-
who's producing this, will be like, nah, David talks about it himself all the time.
I mean, why wouldn't you? But that was like a year ago yesterday, which was a huge moment in your show and stuff. And it was like a big thing. So do you quickly sort of tell us about how that came about? Because you guessed his email, didn't you? That's how you got him on the show.
Oh man, I'm such a fan of Jimmy Carr. Very sentimental moment in time for me. It's not because he was like Jimmy Carr and a celebrity. It was because of his like effect on me. I remember sitting during the pandemic, just after losing my mum, with my sister, watching 8 out of 10 Cats highlights, pissing ourselves at Jimmy, watching Comedy Central Roast Battle, just howling at him. And then he started appearing on podcasts, and I realized he was such a deep thinker. And I read his book, Before and Laughter, and it was such an amazing self-help book because it was delivered again through his origin story, through his tone of voice. It sweetened the pill because it was him sharing it with me, someone I looked up to. And he became one of these Mount Rushmore dream guests for me. And I have it written down, like top 3 dream guests. Jimmy Carr was up there. And I just took a swing. I thought, how am I going to make this happen? I could find his agent, or I could try and see how many degrees of separation I was from him, try and get someone to vouch for me that would vouch to me for someone else, to someone else. And I thought, what's the most dumbest way I could get in contact with him? Probably by guessing his email address. And I did. I sent one email that evening. And I didn't just send an email like, hey, Jimmy, come on my podcast. It was deliberate. Like the whole email was so deliberately crafted to get his attention, to relate, and then to showcase the ROI for him. And it was around the idea of origin stories, how much I related to because he was a maverick. He was a Cambridge alumni, marketing exec at Shell, earning a great wage, and realized that it wasn't for him, and renounced it and became a full-time stand-up comedian who gigged 300 nights a year until he broke free. He gave himself a year to do it, and he did it in like day 301. So I relayed a lot to him. I demonstrated that back to him. I showcased some really nuanced guests that I had on the show that I knew he liked. Rory Sutherland was one of them. So the title of the email was Rory Sutherland spoke about you. Let's speak about him. And just all of these like weird, thoughtful components in this email garnered his attention. He said, yep, I'm not sure when I'm next in Scotland. When are you next in London? I replied, Jimmy, I'll be in London whenever you need me in London. And he said, right, let's do it. He passed me on to his agent, picked a few dates when he was back in London, because little do many people know, he's actually on the road maybe 300 to 320 nights a year. So in the same week that we recorded in London, he was in like Paris, South Africa, Bucharest, like all around. And he was back in London for like 24 hours, whereby he did me, the Diary of the CEO, and Trigonometry all on the same day, and then flew back out that evening to Las Vegas to start his US tour. I think he was having dinner with Adele that night. Mental. But yeah, that's how it came around. I just guessed his email.
And you got to date your sister, which is pretty special as well.
Yeah, full circle. She played T-Boy that day. I remember. Actually, funny story. To kind of humanize this. I want to talk about this in a way that makes it very humble and real, and not like I'm friends with Jimmy Carr or like I interviewed Jimmy Carr. Like, he did me a favor. He obviously saw a bit of himself in me and wanted to help, because I had like a few thousand followers at the time. I had like 2,000 followers on Instagram, and he was doing Diary of the CEO that has millions the same day. He didn't need to do it. Like he did it strategically to help me, and he rocked up. I mean, I was struggling to find a studio to do it in London. Like I don't have a Diary of the CEO budget. London is so expensive. There's a place called Dream Factory, I think it was called. It was charging me like $2,000 to do a studio episode with him. And I found a comedy club called 21 Soho. Shout out 21 Soho. It was the first place I ever watched stand-up comedy.
Oh, wow. It's full circle as well.
So full circle. And he rocked up there by himself. No security, no nothing. I think he got the tube. And like he rocked up, and during the day, the comedy club itself is used as a co-working space, either for the employees or for other people. And he went over to the kind of coffee bar area and said, this place is for sale, isn't it? You'll be out of a job next week. And the barista didn't even like know this place was in liquidation. And he basically announced to the guy like, oh, I might buy this. Can I have a tour?
Whoa.
In central London. So he took a tour of the co-working space, and as we entered it, every co-worker looked round and were like, "Oh my god!"
Jimmy Carr.
and like opened their mouth, and I went, "Sorry, Jimmy, this happens everywhere I go." And he just burst out laughing, and it was like such a sincere moment because he knew I was joking.
Probably also likes just the acting normal in that as well.
Yeah, he was great. And then my sister got my coffee, and we had sat down at the table doing some small chat before we were recording. He was like making fun of the studio actually because it was so small, and there was a weird door that was locked up, and he was like, "Oh, is that where you keep the gimp?" and stuff like that. And my sister was walking down the stair, and this is such a big moment for her. Like, she's never seen me do a podcast before. She's in there with someone that she admires, and she was shaking the coffee, and I could see it spilling onto the saucer. And by the time it got to Jim, there was like half a coffee left. But it was great, and he slagged her on the podcast as well, called her out, and it was great, man. Like,
that's how I heard of you as well. It was like, I remember, I think I listened to that episode he did the same day in the Diary of CEO. I think I listened to that. I remember being in my grand's kitchen, tested what I was like, "I want to listen to what Jimmy Carr podcast." Typed in Jimmy Carr, came up, and I was like, David's from Glasgow, because there's not that many Scottish podcasts really in the space that I'm in. There is obviously a few, but I thought, so I just thought it was interesting just to hear another Scottish person doing something, and that's how I also discovered your show. And then now we're here like a year later, so it's mad how all these things have a, cause and effect and stuff. Let's talk about Origin Story now, though, the new chapter, because it's about to relaunch. So what can you sort of tell us about it? Because when this goes out, like, your new sort of series will have launched. The new podcast will have launched.
Yeah, man. Well, thanks for asking about that. I was starting to get the ick when I was showcasing the previous version, Development by David, because it was so self-referential. And it was just a name I came up with 4 years ago when I started it in my dad's spare bedroom with a refurbished microphone and a webcam, and I just stuck with it. And I did write the mission statement of the podcast back then, which was using origin stories as a self-development tool. And I realized that has always stayed true to the podcast. And I wanted to embrace it more. I wanted to make it my identity. I want to be the person that shares the most fascinating origin stories. But what I realized last year, Jamie, was when you are like a emergent small podcast and you get like a Jimmy Carr on, or your favorite authors, or all these people that elevate the status of your show, you get kind of captured and trapped by it.
Yeah.
And my entire self-worth for a very long time, Jamie, was how big the guest was that was coming on the show, or how I could like signal that to the world, because that was a reflection of how worthy I was. And I had to take some time off to really realize, like, who am I? Well, I'm my origin story, and embrace that and renounce this persona that I was putting online. So it started with rebranding myself, Jamie, and understanding how I want to present. And I realized that part of this was my podcast and what that stood for. And now I want it to be a central home for the world's greatest origin stories. And as part of that, I don't want it to be the Jimmy Carrs, the celebrities. I want it to be everyday people that are just remarkable in their own way, and finding a way to garner a platform, a worthy platform for their voice. Because, like I said, an origin story is a gift, regardless of who you are. And I want to create a place whereby I can share them. And also empower the message to people listening that their origin story is spectacular, regardless of what it is, where they came from, who they are. It's their reason for being. It's their life's work to show up as themselves, because no one else can do it. So Origin Story is going to be a home for that message. And I want to do more podcasts in really dynamic settings that are pertinent to those people's origin stories as well. I have the privilege. Actually, I don't want to share this one, actually, because it's big on live. But I've got a privilege to do a really sentimental podcast with someone that's been so pertinent in my life.
Great.
At a place that's very pertinent to them. Cool setting in the middle of nowhere. But I want to do more of those, like almost like mini documentaries almost. Like the landscape of what podcasting is has changed, visually and experientially. So I want to fuse video and audio together to create something different and refreshing. And it doesn't have to be tied to the profile of who I have on.
Just to sort of expand that, I want to sort of ask you as well, what is the future? What do you think the sort of future of podcasting is? Because it is a sort of changing, because things are changing quite a lot in the space at the moment. I mean, we are constantly having to adapt as podcasters ourselves as well.
I think the visual audio relationship is changing. Podcast used to be just an audio only experience. It used to come across as quite broadcasting, quite like a radio show. I think video podcasts pioneered by perhaps people like Rogan and Dyer the CEO and Call Her Daddy have started to blur the lines of what a podcast is. Is it a visual experience? Is it an audio experience? Is it a visual audio experience? And then there's like challenger shows like Chicken Shop Date, which are very short and locational with a kind of standardized theme. And they're disrupting the podcast space. You see Spotify, and I got to chat with the head of podcast strategy for Spotify recently. This is his wisdom, not mine. Even the Spotify platform is now catering to the TikTokification and videofication of podcasts. So you'll now see like trailers on there, video trailers. And Spotify was legacy an audio platform, but now it's a visual audio platform. So I think we're going to be seeing a lot of more visual audio experiences. I think podcasts are going to become shorter because of attention span, but I think there's also going to be a thirst and a hunger for the real. I think hopefully longer form, looser cut, rawer forms of media will proliferate through.
I hope so, because I'll be fucked otherwise.
No, like I think like I miss things like day in the life vlogs, like Casey Neistat style content. If you're familiar with him, just raw, scrappy, crusty forms of content. I think we're kind of moving away from the hyper polished forms of content as well. I think it's there for the taking.
I think it's really interesting. I've stopped, like Elliot, one of my best mates, very kindly still does a lot of edit support on this podcast and edits the audio side of it. And I've told him to stop taking out ums and pauses and stuff, because I actually prefer it when I listen to a podcast, because it's much more natural. I think it sounds really weirdly polished when it's just like slick as fuck.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's an interesting one. I also want to sort of ask about Glasgow. You're sort of part of the scene here. I suppose we both are, and we're recording in an amazing studio in Glasgow. And
shout out, Paul.
Yeah, shout out to Paul in the green room. But like, what do you see? Do you see there's an opportunity here to sort of do more in Scotland? Because there is more podcasts coming out everywhere. But I do, it's interesting to see other people in the same place you are.
Yeah, I just want to shout out Paul in the green room. To be honest, it's such a good opportunity to praise the work he does. Like without this studio, the podcasting scene probably wouldn't exist. Paul has, like, knowing Paul so well, and not to do a full testimonial to Paul in the podcast, but like he has probably been like one of the central thrust of podcasting in Glasgow. I've known Paul for many years, and I've seen the evolution of the green room in the studio and the people that he's worked with. He works around the clock. He's so accommodating, and that all allows us to do what we're doing. And without him, there is no us, to be honest. So shout out Paul. And I think just having a anti-competitive mindset towards podcasting, realizing that we're all on the same ship and we all have a row to sail. We'll have a kind of equal duty to like help grow the scene in Glasgow, raise more awareness through our work, pass the baton down to others. I think having that kind of collective community mindset will allow the scene to grow. I think there's also a necessity for legacy media to point and aim at people that are in this space and help fund them, help support them, instead of realizing that it's a trend and trying to grab it out of their hands. I think that's important as well. I think they have a role to play in supporting the community, and I think government agencies, Creative Scotland, I think also perhaps maybe what's it called, Scottish International Development, whatever. Is that what they're called? Scottish International Development? I can't remember. Anyway, the body that's responsible for exporting Scottishness should be paying a very close piece of attention to podcasting, because they can export our voice and our thoughts and our entrepreneurship and our creativity
For sure.
through funding shows like yours, mate. So I see that being an important place. But again, without all of that being said, Paul is probably, again, the backbone of this community in Glasgow. So we need more Pauls. Paul doesn't want more Pauls because he's got the largest market share, but yeah, shout out Paul.
It's good. I think what I do like about podcasting is like one of those mediums where everyone does help each other. You go on each other's shows, you plug each other's shows. Like it never feels competitive. Like I'm always happy when I hear another podcast especially in your area. You're like, fucking yes, like
yeah. It's given me an insight into the swingers scene. That's what that must be like.
Very supportive, very willing to get involved. I want to talk to you about development as well, because like the sort of this whole like Chris Williamson thing about the lonely chapter seems to resonate with a lot of people in our position. Like, how do you navigate that? Because you do hold yourself to a very high standard. You work very hard. Like, you know, you sacrifice a lot of things that maybe people our age would be out doing, like, you know, getting pished every weekend or like, you know, spending time with friends. I know you still do have a social life and all that. I'm not saying you're like a little recluse in your room all the time, but you do sacrifice a
Yeah.
lot, I think.
I'm not. Yeah. No, I mean, I'm an incel in my mum's basement for sure. uh, yeah, man. Alcohol and nights out and those things, they're relationships.
Mm,
Relationships tied to identity. And when there is a scene in Glasgow that's up and coming and new, and it's not the popular thing to do a podcast, the easier thing is to do what everyone else does, which could be going out drinking. And I'm not lambasting that. I've had so many fun nights out. I'm going to Bratislava in a few weeks for a holiday where I'll be drinking with my mates. So like I still do normal stuff,
hmm
everyday stuff. But I realize that like where I come from, you know, rural west coast of Scotland, small town, people don't really get it. But then I'm kind of trying to mingle with this new creative scene, entrepreneurial scene that has been part of their source code, and they don't really kind of get me because I'm kind of breaking into the industry and I'm straddling these two new groups, and it feels lonely.
mm,
Because I don't really fit into this new crowd, but I've kind of escaped my old, and it feels like swimming in a body of water, trying to tread. And I think the best thing to do is just pick a direction and swim. But it's exactly where I'm meant to be.
mm.
This, I think, this body of water, that lonely chapter, or that social, that kind of self development mote of loneliness, is exactly where you're meant to be, because it's a mote of self discovery. Because you're not really fitting into a new tribe and you've escaped your old.
Mm.
As you experiment with your identity and who you want to be, there's not like a audience around you to kind of negate or criticize you. You can experiment and become this new version of yourself because no one really cares that you're doing it. And then once you get to experiment loads by maybe trying out podcasts or trying comedy or trying a new job, you can then embed that into your new identity and find your new tribe that supports that, or just find a tribe that is also a bit lost and meandering. Like that's how we know each other, because we're trying to
Mm.
build this thing that feels like a podcast, but could be a business, could be a career. And we're feeling a bit lost, but we connect over that.
Mm.
And I guess hopefully two of us can read from the same map and get somewhere
Yeah.
pretty cool with it, man. And
Mhm.
yeah, man, it's a lonely place, man. But I think embracing that and finding people on the same journey as you is really important.
Yeah, and trying to sort of learn to enjoy the journey of it as well, because I feel like it's something you look back on in 10 years and be like, that was actually the funnest bit. Because I
Mm,
mean, maybe we won't figure it out in 10 years. Who knows? Maybe we'll be like, oh, still figured out. Well, that's, you know, that's all part of the excitement.
yeah, man. And being able to take stock of that, I think we, as a society, especially this type A masculine entrepreneurial culture, compare sidewards and upwards. We look on social media to see people with people we do not know, with things we don't have in places we've never been.
Hmm
And we can lambast our own journeys by falling foul to the expectation of having that too. But in fact, if you were to look back in your own journey, if you were to look at your first episode, Jamie, and see how far you've come, you're doing this in a studio now.
hmm
You've had some amazing guests, some of your heroes in the industry, some of your favorite bands like Dictator and stuff. You're able to actually take stock of the distance traveled
hmm
on your own journey, and I think it's remarkable what you've grown into. And I look back in my journey, like I was looking at my video journal yesterday from meeting Jimmy and just seeing how I've changed from a year, like a
Yeah, it's
year ago
mad,
as
eh?
well. And I think, yeah, I think that's a really important thing, is to take stock of your own journey. The only person you should be comparing yourself against is previous you, as wanky as that sounds, but
It's very true, though. It's a good way to reframe it for sure. I've tried to remind myself that. Yeah. How are we doing for time, Paul? 5 minutes, cool. I suppose just to sort of wrap up, I mean, so we could talk for much longer. Just have to get you back on the show again at some point. But I want to sort of ask as well, because usually our closing questions, what advice would you have for other people? But what would you say to someone right now if they're maybe feeling a bit lost? Like they know that they're destined for something maybe greater than what they're at. Like, what would you say to them? Because that's a lot of people listening that are very ambitious, but it's really hard when you're in that moment to see sometimes like another life for yourself. And you've been there before.
great question, really good question. I think entering a period of solitude where you're negated from the input of other minds is important. To understand what you want to want. And that means eradicating what you think others want you to want.
Mm.
And realizing that life is short. We only get one shot at this, as cliche as it sounds. And realizing life is a movie or an autobiography. And you hold the pen. And you only get one chance, one draft at writing this. And I think asking yourself the question, what if status, money, failure, and power were no option? What would you do? Is a good way to answer that. And for me, doing this is exactly that. Podcasting, interviewing people, getting to connect. I think it's my life's work. It's the ikigai of what I feel the world needs, what I enjoy doing, and what I could maybe get paid for. So I think doing that exercise is really important. And if that feels true to you, being dogmatic and holding it dear to you, don't let anyone else infiltrate that notion, because it's your ikigai. It's your compass. It's your. I think you should follow your nose like a sniffer dog when that thing arises. And if you don't have that in your life, you just have a sense of ambition, and you don't know where to deploy it. Experiment. I think live life like a stand-up comedian or a skateboarder, because what they're willing to do is take visible punches on the nose, or they're feeling comfortable to die on stage, or they're comfortable trying a trick and skinning their knees. But the feedback loop is so fast and instant for them. They get up and try again. They refine, they reiterate, they point an aim in a different direction. They tweak, they experiment, they find the marginal gains, and then they land the trick or they tell the joke and everyone laughs. I think living life like a stand-up comedian is probably the best life hack I could give anyone, because if you don't, you'll become a puppeteer to your ego almost. And I think if you're in that lonely chapter with high ambitions, is just point and aim, fail fast and never big, and maybe find a tribe that supports your ambitions too. I think accountability, and I think actually my biggest piece of advice to a young person is find someone to be accountable to.
That's really good.
Find the thing that you want to do and find someone in that domain to be accountable to.
I think that's a really good place to leave things on, David. Honestly, such a pleasure to have you on the show, and honestly, I don't ever leave seeing you hanging out with you without feeling like quite inspired and quite like, okay, we can make this fucking shit happen. So no, honestly, big credit to what you do. And where can people find you? Where can people find the new show?
First of all, Jamie, thanks for having me on. This is a needed podcast. I'm not just saying this because I'm on the podcast. I'm a huge fan of what it is and what it stands for. I wish it great success. Every industry needs to see what is going on in your industry. There needs to be more governmental backing. There needs to be more institutional backing. And fair play to you for carrying the weight of that on your shoulders, having this show. Everyone, listen to the next episode, listen to the last episode. There's far better people on this show than me. Where can people find me? I can leave my address if they want to come over later on. I'm a bit lonely, as we were talking about earlier. No, you can find me on Instagram at David McIntosh Jr. That's David McIntosh Jr.
Yeah, and I'm subscribed to the show as well. There's links to all David's stuff below. So thank you very much, man. Pleasure having you on. Cool. Thank you, Paul.